Good, good day, viewers, and welcome to another virtual presentation with yours truly sharing insights, analysis, and impact on public policy, national issues of interest to all of us. My apologies, first of all, for missing the deadline as earlier as indicated. Uh, Notwithstanding, uh, here I am making this presentation as promised on these topical issues that I've selected to deal with in this uh, in this episode. The first issue before I get into the main presentation that I have planned for you in this session is a statement made by the opposition leader. Uh, a reporter called me a few days ago for an invited comment on the statement made by the opposition leader in relation to the revised withdrawal rules for the Natural Resource Fund. Let me see if I could. Let me read exactly. Let me quote this statement verbatim, and then I will respond to it. So this is the statement, the quoted statement. The governance of the oil and gas sector is in deep trouble. The government made the fundamental mistake of changing the laws we had put in place so that they can take 99% of the Natural Resource Fund. That defeats the very purpose of the Natural Resource Fund. Now, I've dealt with this issue, this the Natural Resource Fund, the fiscal rules, the withdrawal rules. I've dealt with it on multiple occasions. So, as a reminder, importantly, let's go back to what they had in place. They, I'm not going to deal with the question of the constitutionality and or the legality of their Natural Resource Fund Act, which was passed in the National Assembly after the no confidence motion. So I'm not going to deal with that element of it. I'm just going to deal with the withdrawal and the fiscal rules that they had. And the fiscal rule that they had was, first of all, it was complicated. Nobody understood what really was the withdrawal rule. And while it was in the, some of the provisions they had in there, is that the minister would have received, the finance minister would have received advice from technical persons, economists, and advisors, all of which were provisions in the law in the Natural Resource Fund Act that they passed. Notwithstanding those provision of the minister receiving advice on the fiscally sustainable sum to be withdrawn, the law the law empowered the minister to override whatever advice he receives in that regard, to completely disregard whatever advice he receives in that regard, and only he held the power. Only he held the absolute power, the absolute authority to determine the sum to be withdrawn from the fund. And if I'm not mistaken, The way their NRF was designed, it was designed in a way that would have allowed them to take direct charge from the fund. All of that. So let me comment on that model. One, it's not transparent. Two, nobody knows other than the minister what is the formula, how he would make that determination, and the authority rests with him exclusively. Those provisions were changed when the incumbent assumed office in 2020. They immediately set out to amend the Natural Resource Fund Act, as you would recall. Those provisions concerning the fiscal rules of the fund, the fiscal operation of the fund were dramatically changed to align, to bring it more in compliance with international best practices, which it was lauded for by international institutions, as you would recall, by the IMF, by the World Bank, and other credible institutions. They complicated an unknown formula under the APNU that Norton is praising that they had a superior formula, which is not the case, and you could it's still up on the internet, so you could verify that for yourself and see if you could find where that formula is, and if you could apply the formula. Good luck with that. We now have in the current act there is a transparent formula. It is a simplified formula. It is a sliding scale, and a primary school grade 6 student could understand the formula and apply it. The law was also amended to remove the direct charge from the fund, and it was amended to allow withdrawals from the fund. Withdrawals from the fund could only be obtained subject to the approval of the National Assembly through the budget through the through the budget approval process, and the monies withdrawn from the fund has to go to the consolidated fund. It has to be transferred to the consolidated fund, then withdrawn. So the transparency component dramatically was dramatically enhanced in the current PPPC model of the NRF legislation, contrary to what the opposition leader would want you to believe, right? Let me read what he says again. The governance of the oil and gas sector is in deep trouble. The government made a fundamental mistake of changing the laws we had put in place. I've explained to you the law was actually improved in terms of transparency, in terms of a simplified, transparent formula, and greater accountability, of course, public accountability, so that they can take 99% of the natural resource fund. So let's deal with the 99%. If you check the balance in the fund from inception, the inflows and outflows of the fund vis-a-vis the withdrawals, from inception to up to the last report I looked at, which was the second quarter of this year, the total inflows to the fund cumulatively amounted to just over 6 billion US dollars. In Guyana dollar terms, it's about 1.2 trillion dollars, just over 1.2 trillion dollars. If you look at the withdrawal for the same period of the fund, the withdrawal was just about 50% cumulatively. So that means you have 50% of the money. You have about there was $3.2 billion sitting in the fund, 3.2 billion US dollars sitting in the fund as at the end of the second quarter. That includes interest earned. Interest earned on the fund to date is $279 million. The interest earned alone is I think the Demerara Harbor Bridge. The price tag for that is 200 million and change, 200 and something million US dollars. So the interest earned on the fund to date equates to, I think it's a little bit above, it's a little bit above, if I'm not mistaken, the price tag for the Demerara Bridge is 240 million and $279 million. That's enough to build another bridge across the river. That's just on the interest earned based on the balances in the fund. So where is the 99%? So instantly, the 99% claim by the opposition leader is inaccurate, completely false. Then what I think he was referring to, but he probably he himself didn't understand what he was trying to say, and this speaks to the level of competence or incompetence, you determine which one, that they have to contend with. I think what he really meant was that the withdrawal, assuming this quotation I'm reading here from the reporter is correct, I think what he really meant is the withdrawal formula was amended in 2024. I nonetheless treated the question at face value and I dealt with all those other issues because it's important, and especially at this time where you have a an overwhelming disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda campaign by by the political actors contesting the upcoming election. So what he really meant was what he was really referring to, but he himself, he was poorly advised or he didn't know, I don't know who advised him, was the withdrawal formula was amended in 2024. So the withdrawal formula, the old withdrawal formula was 100% on the first $500 million balance in the fund, 75% on the second $500 million in the fund, 50% on the third $500 million in the fund, 25% on the fourth $500 million in the fund, 5% on the fifth $500 million in the fund, and 3% on any balance thereafter. Right? 3% on 3.5 billion and above. So that was the old formula. That formula in 2024 was revised. So from those percentage, that sliding scale that I just outlined, the revised formula is 100% on the first $1 billion in the fund, 95% on the second $1 billion, 90% on the third $1 billion, 85% on the fourth $1 billion, 50% on the fifth $1 billion, and 10% on the sixth $1 billion. So this, I think what confuses them is the 100% and the 95%. But what is important to understand is the fiscal rules, the withdrawal rules of the Natural Resource Fund. The formula is designed with the overall macroeconomic framework and projected macroeconomic growth, medium and long term, in mind. So that formula, that withdrawal formula, is not a formula designed in isolation from the macroeconomic framework. So to really understand how to apply the formula and to really determine whether the withdrawal formula would deplete the fund per se, as they're claiming 99% from the balance, then you got to apply the formula based on the projected scale of the projected growth in revenue and production. So in the old formula was based on an environment, was based on a $500 billion budget. Now the budget is doubled. We're a $1.2 trillion budget. We are now a $20 billion economy in US dollar terms. From a $4 billion economy pre-oil to a $5 and $6 billion in the first few years post-oil. So that is the fiscal context, if you will. Production started at 120,000 barrels per day. First oil was December 2019. Production was scaled to, within a matter of 5 years from first oil, to presently we're doing now more than 600,000 barrels per day, maybe close to 707 or 750,000 barrels per day by the end of this year. That's how rapidly oil production, oil output has increased. Again, not in isolation from the policy framework. This level of increase that that is achieved within 5 years of first oil is attributed to the deliberate policy environment and management of this sector to achieve this level of output, to maximize the value from that sector on the part of the incumbent government. So that's the fiscal context of the current formula, in which the old formula was designed. So the effective rate of withdrawal under the old formula before the revised formula in 24, when the law was amended, when the withdrawal formula was amended, The effective withdrawal rate on a balance of 6 billion US dollars was 23%. 23%. If the fund, the higher the balance, the lower the effective withdrawal rate, because the formula by design institutes institute a threshold. There is a cap. There's a you can't. The formula does not allow withdrawal beyond a certain threshold, because the formula by its design, by its nature, it is designed to cap the maximum, to to achieve a maximum ceiling at any given point in time, at any given in any given fiscal period, the maximum amount you could withdraw. So the maximum amount in absolute terms that the government could have withdrawn from the fund, say on a balance of $6 billion, or 8 billion US dollars, was not exceeding $1.5 billion in absolute value. On a balance of $6 billion, the effective withdrawal rate works out to 23%. So not 99%, or not even 90%, not even 80%. The revised formula now, it's the same rationale, because we came from 5 years from first oil, 120,000 barrel per day, whereby in the first year we earn just about 300 million, to earning $2 billion US dollars into the fund. The withdrawal to date is just about 50% from the fund. We still have 50% of the value, including interest earned, sitting in the fund. Production now is north of 600,000 barrels per day, nearing maybe 700,000 barrels per day. In the medium term, by 2030, again, driven by the deliberate policy and management of the sector on the part of the government to achieve these results, by 2030, we are poised to ramp up production. To production is poised, output is poised to peak at 1.7 million barrels per day. So at that point, with the revised formula, on say a balance of $12 billion, by then we'll be earning, assuming current prices today remain constant, or average around the average prices same region that obtains today. Say on a balance of $12 billion, 12 billion US dollars, the revised formula, the maximum withdrawal, the maximum effective rate of withdrawal is 41%. So again, far away from 99% or 90%, as the opposition is claiming. So that has absolutely no merit. The claim by the opposition in relation to the withdrawal rule of the Natural Resource Fund is completely false, completely inaccurate. The withdrawal rule, even the revised withdrawal rule, is designed to keep the effective withdrawal rate almost the same as what as almost the same where it was under the old formula, based on the projected balances. based on the projected growth of the fund size, based on the projected growth on the level of output, the effective withdrawal rate would not exceed a certain threshold, would not exceed, and I give you example, the higher the balance, the lower the effective rate of withdrawal. So on a $12 billion, it's 41%. The balance goes up, of course, the balance by then at $1.7 billion, but then the balance will be far greater than $12 billion, which means your effective rate of withdrawal will be far less than 41%. So nowhere close to the region of 90% or even 80% or 99, much less 90, the 99% claim. So that's on the that's on the issue of the opposition claim, debunking the opposition's claim or bringing clarity, which you can independently verify, you can independently ascertain for yourself. Just go and take the Natural Resource Fund Act and read it. It's accessible online. Look at the balances in the fund. The reports are on the Bank of Guyana website. The old, the APNU version of the Natural Resource Fund Act, that is also available online, and you can do your own comparison. You don't have to take my word for it. Now, in the interest of not having too long presentation, I may not be able to get into my main presentation that I want to do on this session. So this session, which will be aired at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 8 o'clock in the morning, because I missed the 8 o'clock last night, I will do another session. So this will be at 8 in the morning by the time this is live stream. So at 1 o'clock today, I will have another session where I will get into the main presentation because I want to take my time to go through that presentation. So maybe I'll take another 5 minutes to comment on something else, on another issue, uh, more in the political arena, touching on concerning the Carter Center report. And the vice president, I just want to pick up from where the vice president left off. On a particular matter, he made reference to the pre-election observer report by the Carter Center, which adopted the opposition party's allegations about abuse of state fund. I'm not going to read. I don't want to regurgitate what the vice president said on that matter at his press conference uh, yesterday. What I want to add, would like to add to what he said is to bring a little bit more greater clarity and understanding on this notion about abuse of state resources. So, to establish, in addition to what he mentioned about the resources assigned to the prime minister, the president, they are still holding those offices and therefore they still have the privilege to utilize those resources. That's not abuse of resources. If, so that aside, if the opposition and the Carter Center is referring to government programs, as he mentioned, the hospitals, the opening of hospitals, and those type of activities, those are not abuse of resources. The question is, how do you determine whether what would amount, what would amount, or what constitutes abuse of state resources, financial resources specifically? So here is the important point to note. A national budget was passed earlier in the year for the fiscal year 2025. That budget that was duly constitutionally and legally passed, legally approved by the National Assembly, legally assented to by the President, is a budget for the entire fiscal year. So all the programs, all the programs in that budget that were executed before the dissolution of Parliament, the government simply can't pause or abort those programs because the budget was duly and legally and constitutionally and properly approved early in the year before the dissolution of Parliament by the President. Therefore, those programs in the budget that were implemented up to the point of that had commenced, contracted, executed, commenced, were commenced up to the point before the President dissolved Parliament, those programs cannot be put at a standstill. It has to continue. That would therefore be considered routine government business in the implementation of those programs. Although we are about to go to an election, because those programs are already duly approved, already duly implementation entered into the implementation phase, and therefore the government, the administration of government has to continue to implement those programs and those projects before those that were implemented before Parliament was dissolved. So cannot be deemed that cannot be deemed abuse of resource. The only way there would be an abuse of resource, other than the egregious abuse of resources perpetrated by the APNU+AFC in the no confidence period, that was the gravest form of, of abuse of state resources, financial resources. But that aside, in order for you to determine whether there is an abuse of state resources in relation to electioneering activities on the part of the incumbent, is if there is evidence, and if they did, then the evidence will be uncovered in the Auditor General's report, because state resources has to be audited. The only way is if state resources, financial resources, programs and programs, budgeted programs in the budget, in the duly approved budget, were redirected to electioneering activities. Only if those resources were redirected to fund campaign activities, only then one can determine there is an abuse. And in fact, that would not even be that's more than an abuse. That would be misappropriation of public funds. Not just abuse, but beyond that would be beyond abuse. That would be misappropriation. That's the only way you can make that determination. Not by the president still using his vehicle and the escort and the prime minister and so on. It is still in their care until there is a new government. Until there is a new government, and if they have to, if they during that transition phase to a new government. So that's an important commentary I wanted to deal with. This notion of abuse of resources on the part of the incumbent, that one would have to one would have to ascertain whether approved public policy and approved programs in the budget, programs in the budget, funding, financing of those programs, financial resources appropriated for those programs were redirected for electioneering activities, which would amount to misappropriation of funds, worse than abuse. So none of that is happening. What you're witnessing, those are things that were already provided for in the budget, were already approved in the budget, and were already implemented, and therefore there is no abuse, there is, and more importantly, there is no misappropriation, there is no breach of the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act. Okay, so I will end there, and later today we'll pick up from here, and then I will go into the main presentation, which is a comparative analysis of the fiscal orientation and economic outcomes, comparing the two administrations. And we have looked at a time series of data and various economic indicators to look at the trend, to observe the trend, observe the pattern, observe the outcome of different policy orientation, fiscal policy orientation, all the way from 1992 to present. So at 1 o'clock today, I will have another session to go into this presentation that you're seeing on my screen, as these other two issues, these other two matters took up almost just, it's already 30 minutes. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in a few hours. Have a good one.